Story 1. The Mirror Truck. Marcus Chen had been driving the I-80 corridor for 17 years, hauling everything from produce to auto parts across the western states. He prided himself on his perfect safety record and his ability to stay alert during those long midnight hauls when most drivers pulled over to rest. His Kenworth W900 was immaculate, maintained like a showroom model, and he knew every sound the engine made, every vibration in the steering wheel. That October night in 2019, somewhere between Winnemucca and Battle Mountain, Nevada, Marcus would question everything he thought he knew about the road. The night started like any other. He'd loaded a shipment of electronics in Sacramento, bound for Salt Lake City, pulling out of the warehouse at 10 p.m. to beat the morning traffic. The weather was clear, temperature hovering around 55 degrees, and the full moon cast enough light to see the sagebrush-covered hills rolling past his windows. His CB radio crackled occasionally with other drivers checking in, discussing road conditions and truck stop locations. Marcus had his thermos of coffee secured in the cup holder, his logbook updated, and his GPS showing a straight shot through the Nevada emptiness for the next 120 miles. Around 2 a.m., he noticed headlights in his driver's side mirror. Not unusual, plenty of trucks ran this route at night. But something about these lights caught his attention. They maintained an exact distance behind him, matching his speed precisely. When he accelerated to 70, they accelerated. When he slowed to 65, they slowed. Marcus had encountered aggressive drivers before, tailgaters who rode too close, but this was different. The truck behind him stayed exactly 3 car lengths back, never varying the distance by even a foot. He tried raising the driver on the CB. "This is eastbound driver in the blue Kenworth, mile marker 228. You got your ears on back there?" Nothing but static. He cycled through channels, empty. That was odd. There were always drivers chatting on CB, especially on a major interstate route. He tried again. "Any eastbound traffic near Battle Mountain? You copy." Silence. Marcus checked his mirrors again. The truck behind him was identical to his own. Same model Kenwright W900, same blue color, same chrome detailing. Even the mud flaps looked identical. His pulse quickened. He'd customized his truck extensively. It wasn't a common configuration. What were the odds of encountering an exact duplicate on this empty stretch of highway? He decided to test something. He flipped on his right turn signal, preparing to take the next exit about 5 miles ahead. In his mirror, the truck behind him activated its right turn signal at the exact same moment. The synchronization was perfect, down to the millisecond. Marcus felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. He canceled the turn signal. The other truck's signal went dark instantly. This had to be coincidence. Maybe someone was messing with him, copying his movements for kicks. Truckers had strange senses of humor sometimes, but the highway remained eerily empty otherwise. No other vehicles in sight, just the 2 identical trucks moving through the Nevada night. Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his speed to 75. The truck behind him maintained its exact distance. He could see more details now in his mirror. The license plate was obscured by shadow, but the truck appeared to be carrying the same type of trailer he was pulling. His mouth went dry. He grabbed his phone, thinking he'd take a picture, but the screen wouldn't illuminate. Dead battery, even though it had been at 70% when he last checked. The exit came up, and Marcus made a split-second decision. Without signaling this time, he jerked the wheel right, taking the exit ramp fast enough that his trailer swayed. He watched his mirror. The blue truck behind him executed the exact same maneuver, at the exact same angle, maintaining its precise distance. Impossible. He'd given no warning, yet it had anticipated his movement perfectly. The exit led to a deserted truck stop that looked abandoned, its gas pumps dark, the convenience store windows boarded up. Marcus didn't care. He needed to stop, to confront whoever was following him. He pulled into the empty lot and climbed down from his cab, leaving the engine running. The other truck pulled in behind him, stopping in the exact mirror position where Marcus had parked. But no one got out. Marcus approached the other truck, his boots crunching on gravel. As he got closer, he could see through the windshield. The driver's seat was occupied. Someone sat behind the wheel, silhouetted in the dim light. Marcus moved closer, his heart hammering. The figure wore the same red flannel shirt Marcus had put on that evening, the same baseball cap, the same... He stopped 10 feet from the truck. The figure in the driver's seat turned to look at him. Marcus stared at his own face. Not similar. Not a doppelganger. Exactly his face, down to the scar on his left cheek from a childhood accident, the silver in his stubble, the way his right eye squinted slightly more than his left. The other Marcus smiled, raised a hand in greeting, and pointed behind him. Marcus turned. His own truck sat empty in the parking lot, but something was wrong with it. The paint looked faded, weathered. The chrome was pitted with rust. Weeds grew up around the tires. He ran back to it, touching the hood. Cold. Not engine-warm cold, but cold like it had been sitting for years. Months of dust covered the windshield. He yanked open the door. The interior was destroyed. The seat was torn, stuffing spilling out. The dashboard was cracked and sun-damaged. Cobwebs stretched across the steering wheel. His logbook lay on the passenger seat, but when he picked it up, the pages crumbled in his hands. The last entry was dated October 15th, 2019, tonight's date, but the paper felt ancient, brittle as dried leaves. Marcus spun around. The other truck, his mirror truck, was rolling forward slowly. The driver, his twin, waved once more and pulled back onto the entrance ramp, accelerating onto the interstate. Marcus stood in the abandoned truck stop, watching his own truck disappear into the Nevada darkness. He tried his phone again. Still dead. His radio, static. He was stranded in a truck that looked like it had been sitting in this lot for decades, on an exit that wasn't marked on his GPS. When he walked to the highway, no cars passed, no trucks, nothing. The road stretched empty in both directions under that full moon. Marcus waited 3 hours before an old pickup truck finally appeared, driven by a rancher who looked startled to see anyone at the abandoned stop. The rancher told him that the truck stop had been closed since 2005, and that no trucks had used this exit in years since they'd built a new interchange 5 miles east. Marcus asked about the blue Kenworth. The rancher shook his head. Hadn't seen any trucks at all that night. They towed Marcus's truck, rusted and decrepit, to a garage in Battle Mountain. The mechanic examined it and told Marcus the vehicle looked like it had been sitting exposed to the elements for at least 15 years. Every fluid was dried up, the engine seized, the electronics corroded beyond repair. Marcus showed him his registration, his logbook entries from that very night. The mechanic couldn't explain it. Marcus never found his cargo. The shipping company had no record of the load he'd picked up in Sacramento. The warehouse he'd gotten it from didn't exist at the address he remembered. His bank account showed no payment for that run. It was as if the entire trip had been erased, except for the ruined truck that sat in the impound lot. He retired from trucking that month. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus drives the back roads near his home in Montana, and he watches his mirrors. He's terrified of seeing those headlights again, maintaining that perfect distance. Terrified of seeing himself driving, waving, pointing toward a future where he's already stopped, already been sitting in an abandoned lot for years, waiting for the moment when he'd make that split-second decision to take an exit that would trap him outside of time. The truck still sits in the impound lot in Battle Mountain. They can't sell it because the VN number dates it as a 2018 model, but the deterioration suggests decades of abandonment. Sometimes the lot attendant swears he sees a figure in the driver's seat, wearing a red flannel shirt and baseball cap, writing in a logbook that crumbles to dust as he turns each page. Story 2. The Passenger. Jennifer Rollins had driven delivery vans for Midwest Express Freight for 9 years, mostly regional routes through Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. She preferred the smaller vehicles to big rigs, easier to maneuver, better fuel economy, and the routes let her sleep in her own bed most nights. On March 3rd, 2021, she accepted a last-minute overnight run from Chicago to Minneapolis, filling in for a driver who'd called in sick. The route was straightforward. I-90 through Wisconsin, 600 miles round trip, hauling medical supplies to 3 different hospitals. She'd done similar runs dozens of times. Jennifer left the Chicago distribution center at 11 p.m., her van loaded with carefully packed boxes of surgical equipment and pharmaceuticals. The night was cold, temperature in the low 20s, with light snow beginning to fall as she merged onto I-90. She had her playlist ready, a bag of trail mix, and 2 Red Bulls to keep her sharp. The first delivery wasn't until 6 a.m. in Madison, giving her plenty of time. Traffic thinned out after midnight as she crossed into Wisconsin. The snow picked up, not heavy enough to be dangerous, but enough to make her turn on the wipers and slow to 60. Her headlights carved a tunnel through the falling white, the highway stretching ahead in an empty ribbon. She passed the occasional semi-truck, their taillights glowing red in the snow, but mostly she had the road to herself. Around 1:30 a.m. near Janesville, she saw the hitchhiker, a woman standing on the shoulder, illuminated by Jennifer's headlights. She wore a white dress, inappropriate for the weather, and had her thumb out in the universal sign. Jennifer's first instinct was to keep driving. Company policy strictly forbade picking up hitchhikers, and even without the policy, picking up strangers on a deserted highway at night was asking for trouble. But something made her look in her rearview mirror. The woman stood motionless in the falling snow, and Jennifer felt a pang of conscience. In this weather, anyone stranded on the roadside could die of exposure. She slowed, debating. Finally, she pulled onto the shoulder, 50 yards ahead of where the woman stood. Jennifer watched her side mirror, waiting for the woman to approach. The figure walked slowly through Jennifer's taillights, her white dress billowing in the wind. As she got closer, Jennifer could see she looked young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair plastered to her face by the wet snow. She tapped on the passenger window. Jennifer unlocked the door. "Get in, get warm. This weather is brutal." The woman climbed in without a word, pulling the door shut. She was soaked through, her dress clinging to her thin frame. But she didn't shiver. Her skin looked pale, almost bluish. Jennifer cranked up the heat. "There's a rest stop about 20 miles ahead. I can drop you there where you can get help. Do you have a phone? Family to call?" The woman turned to look at Jennifer. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like pools of oil. When she spoke, her voice sounded layered, multiple tones speaking in unison. "Keep driving. Don't stop." Jennifer's blood turned to ice. She grabbed for the door handle, but her fingers wouldn't work. Her body wouldn't respond. She sat frozen in the driver's seat, unable to move anything except her eyes. The van was still in park, engine running, but she couldn't access her own muscles. The woman, the thing, smiled, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp. "Drive," it said again, and Jennifer's body obeyed without her consent. Her hands gripped the wheel, her foot pressed the accelerator. Her arms guided the van back onto the highway. She was a prisoner in her own body, screaming internally, while her physical form calmly drove north through the snow. She tried to speak, to scream, but her vocal cords wouldn't engage. The thing beside her began to hum, a tuneless sound that made Jennifer's teeth ache. It reached forward and changed her radio station, cycling through channels until it found only static, then turned the volume up loud. The white noise filled the van, mixing with the humming, creating a sound that felt like it was boring into Jennifer's skull. Miles passed. Jennifer's eyes saw the highway, saw the snow, saw the mile markers ticking by, but she couldn't control anything. Her body drove with mechanical precision, maintaining exactly 65 miles per hour, staying perfectly centered in her lane. Inside, Jennifer's conscious mind thrashed and fought, trying desperately to move even a finger, to press the brake, to do anything. The thing pulled down the sun visor and examined its reflection in the mirror there. It touched its face, stretching the skin, and Jennifer realized with horror that the face was changing. The features were shifting, rearranging, becoming more like Jennifer's own face. It was copying her, stealing her appearance feature by feature. At mile marker 171, the thing spoke again. "Turn here." Jennifer's hands jerked the wheel right, taking an exit she'd never noticed before. The exit ramp led to a narrow road that didn't appear on her GPS. The road wound through dense forest, snow-covered branches creating a tunnel effect. No streetlights, no other vehicles, just darkness and snow, and the static from her radio. They drove for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Jennifer's sense of time had become distorted. The road deteriorated from asphalt to gravel to dirt, but her van navigated it smoothly, as if guided by something other than the road itself. Finally, they emerged into a clearing. Vehicles filled the clearing, dozens of them. Cars, trucks, vans, spanning decades of makes and models. A 1970s Buick sat next to a modern Tesla. A delivery truck identical to Jennifer's was parked beside a vintage Volkswagen bus. All of them were empty, doors hanging open, interiors exposed to the snow. And standing among the vehicles were people. Dozens of people, all wearing white, all with that same too pale skin, all with those black oil pool eyes. Jennifer's body put the van in park and removed the keys. The thing beside her opened its door and climbed out. Jennifer's body did the same, moving in perfect synchronization. She stood in the snow, unable to feel the cold, watching as the thing that had stolen her face approached the others. They gathered around Jennifer, examining her. One reached out and touched her cheek with fingers that felt like ice. Another circled her, studying her from every angle. The one who'd been in her van spoke to the others in that layered voice, words in a language Jennifer didn't recognize. They nodded, seemed to reach some agreement. Then Jennifer's body started walking, not toward her van, but toward the tree line on the far side of the clearing. She walked past a rusted pickup truck where skeletal remains sat behind the wheel, past a sedan where clothing and personal belongings were scattered across the seats. Her legs carried her to the edge of the forest where the snow hadn't fallen, where the ground was bare dirt and dead leaves. The things in white followed, forming a circle around her. They began to hum again, that same tuneless sound, but louder now, coming from dozens of throats. The sound vibrated through Jennifer's bones. The world started to blur at the edges, colors bleeding together. She felt herself being pulled apart, consciousness separating from body. In that moment of separation, Jennifer found her voice. She screamed, a primal sound of terror and rage that cut through the humming. The sound seemed to startle them, and their concentration broke for just a second. In that second, Jennifer felt control snap back into her body. She ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just bolted toward her van. Her legs were stiff, unwilling, but she forced them to move. Behind her, the humming stopped, replaced by sounds of pursuit. She didn't look back. She reached her van, yanked the door open, jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine turned over. Thank God it started. She threw it in reverse, not caring about the vehicles around her, just focusing on escape. Metal shrieked as she scraped against another van, but she kept going. The things in white were running toward her now, moving faster than humans should move, their white dresses streaming behind them. Jennifer spun the wheel, got the van pointed back toward the dirt road, and floored the accelerator. The van fishtailed in the snow but gained traction. She rocketed down the narrow road, branches scraping both sides. Her hands shook on the wheel, but she didn't slow down. She had to get away, had to get back to the highway, to lights, to reality. The dirt road seemed longer going back, stretching impossibly. Jennifer sobbed as she drove, sure that she'd never find the exit, that she was trapped in this forest forever. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw the entrance ramp ahead, saw the lights of the interstate. She merged onto I-90 going 70, accelerating to 80, putting distance between herself and that exit. When she finally risked a glance in her rearview mirror, the exit was gone. Just smooth highway shoulder where the ramp had been. Jennifer drove straight through to Minneapolis without stopping, too terrified to pull over. She made her deliveries in a daze, then drove straight back to Chicago and quit her job that same day. She sold her car and moved to Arizona, as far from Wisconsin as she could get, while staying in the continental United States. She never drives at night anymore, and she's never picked up a hitchhiker since. Sometimes Jennifer still hears that humming in her dreams, and she wakes up unable to move for several seconds, trapped in her own body just like that night. She checks her reflection obsessively, terrified that she'll see those black eyes staring back at her, evidence that something else is wearing her face. Story 3. The Broadcast. Raymond Ray. Foster had been a long-haul trucker for 23 years, mostly running routes between Texas and California, hauling everything from furniture to construction materials. He was 52 years old, divorced, with 2 grown kids he didn't see enough. The road was his life. His Peterbilt 579 was more home than his Dallas apartment. Ray was known among other drivers as steady, reliable, and unflappable. He'd driven through blizzards, dust storms, and near misses with drunk drivers, always keeping his cool. On August 17, 2020, Ray was hauling prefabricated steel beams from Houston to Phoenix. He'd left Houston at 4 p.m., planning to drive through the night to make his delivery deadline. The route took him west on I-10, through San Antonio, past Kerrville, and into the endless Texas hill country. By midnight, he was 200 miles past San Antonio, somewhere in the emptiness between Sonora and Ozona, where civilization disappeared, and the landscape became nothing but scrubland and starlight. Ray's CB radio had been unusually quiet all night. That wasn't normal. There were always drivers chatting, especially on a major freight corridor like I-10. He'd occasionally try to raise someone. "This is westbound Peterbilt at mile marker 392. Anyone got their ears on?" Nothing. Just the hiss of empty airwaves. His FM radio picked up only static between stations, the signals too far apart in this desolate stretch of Texas. Around 1 a.m., his CB crackled to life. Not with the usual chatter, but with a broadcast. A woman's voice, clear and professional, like a news anchor. "Emergency alert system activation. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. All drivers on Interstate 10 between mile markers 380 and 450 should exit the highway immediately and seek shelter. Do not continue westbound. Do not attempt to turn around. Exit at the nearest ramp and proceed south. This is an emergency alert." Ray's pulse kicked up. In all his years driving, he'd never heard an EAS alert over CB radio. That wasn't how the system worked. He glanced at his phone. No signal. Unsurprising in this remote area. His GPS showed the highway stretching ahead with no exits for another 20 miles. He was at mile marker 396, right in the middle of the alert zone. The broadcast repeated, word for word, same inflections, same pauses. Ray grabbed his CB mic. "This is westbound driver at 396. I copy your emergency alert. What's the nature of the emergency?" Over. Silence. Then the broadcast started again from the beginning. Identical. Ray's mouth went dry. He started watching for exits. The next one should be at mile marker 404, a small ranch road that led to some tiny town he'd never stopped at. 8 miles. He could do 8 miles. The broadcast cut off mid-sentence. Static filled the channel. Then a different voice came through, male, younger, with an edge of panic. "Don't exit. Jesus Christ, whatever you do, don't exit. Stay on the highway. Drive fast. Get out of the zone. They're at the exits. They're waiting at the exits." Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. "Who is this? What's going on?" "Just drive. Don't stop. Don't exit. Don't—" The voice cut off, replaced by a sound that made Ray's skin crawl. It was screaming, raw and agonized, but layered with something else. Laughter, maybe, or music, distorted beyond recognition. The sound cycled up and down in pitch, creating a nauseating harmony. Ray turned off the CB with shaking hands. His mouth was dry. This had to be some kind of prank, truckers messing with each other. But the fear in that second voice had sounded genuine. The screaming had sounded genuine. He pushed his speed to 80. The Peterbilt wasn't designed for high speed with a full load, but Ray needed out of this zone. Mile marker 400 passed, then 401. The darkness pressed in from all sides, his headlights seeming dimmer than usual. He checked his dash. All lights normal, fuel good, everything operational. But something felt wrong. At mile marker 403, Ray saw the exit coming up. His headlights caught the sign, Ranch Road 2083, junction 2 miles. Against every instinct, he was relieved he wasn't taking it. But as he approached, he saw vehicles on the exit ramp. 3 cars and a pickup truck, all stopped, arranged in a neat line leading up the ramp. Their headlights were on, pointing up toward the overpass, but no one was moving. Ray slowed slightly as he passed, craning to see better. The vehicles were empty, all of them. Doors closed, lights on, engines presumably running based on the exhaust in the cool night air, but no drivers visible. Ray felt sweat trickle down his back, despite the air conditioning. His CB crackled back to life on its own. The female voice returned. "Emergency alert system activation. This is not a test." But something was different now. The voice was slower. The words stretched out and distorted. "All drivers should exit immediately. Exit now. Exit now. Exit now. The word exit began repeating, faster and faster, overlapping itself until it became a meaningless percussion of syllables. Ray reached to turn off the CB again, but his hand froze. His FM radio had turned on by itself, and it was broadcasting the same thing. Same voice, same distortion, perfect synchronization between both radios. He punched the power button. The radio turned off for a second, then clicked back on. The broadcast continued. Mile marker 410. Ray was past the zone specified in the original alert, but he didn't feel safer. His speedometer read 85, his engine whining in protest. The highway ahead looked wrong somehow. The lane lines seemed to curve and waver in his headlights, though he knew the road was straight here. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. A new voice cut through the broadcast, interrupting the repetitive chanting. This one was mechanical, synthetic, like early computer-generated speech. Driver Raymond Foster. Social Security number 452789314. Born June 3rd, 1968. Dallas, Texas. Current speed 85 miles per hour. Current location mile marker 411. You were warned to exit. Ray's blood turned to ice. How did it know his name? His social? That information wasn't broadcast anywhere, wasn't accessible over radio. He grabbed his CB mic with a shaking hand. Who is this? How do you know my name? Exit at mile marker 415. This is your final warning. Like hell I will, Ray muttered. He pressed harder on the accelerator, watching his speed climb to 90. The Peterbilt shuddered, his trailer swaying slightly, but he didn't back off. Mile marker 412. 13. 14. The exit at 415 appeared ahead, lit by sodium lights that gave everything a sickly orange glow. The exit ramp was crowded with vehicles. Not 3 or 4 like the last one, dozens. Cars, trucks, vans, even motorcycles, all arranged in perfect rows like a parking lot. All empty, all with their lights on, and standing among them, illuminated by the orange lights, were figures. Ray couldn't see them clearly from the highway, but they were humanoid, standing motionless between the vehicles. Ray blew past the exit doing 93. He didn't look back, but in his side mirror, he saw the figures turning to watch him pass, their heads swiveling in unison. The broadcast stopped. Complete silence from both radios. Ray drove in that silence for 5 minutes, 10, watching his mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The highway remained empty. No other vehicles in either direction. Just Ray and his load of steel beams and the Texas night. Then his radio came alive again. But this time, it was just voices. Normal voices. Truckers chatting about weather and load times and truck stop locations. Ray grabbed his mic. This is westbound Peterbilt. I'm at mile marker 432. Anyone copy? Roger, westbound. This is eastbound Semi at 435. I copy you fine. How's the road ahead? Ray almost sobbed with relief. Clear. Road's clear. Hey, did you hear anything weird on the CB in the last half hour? Any emergency broadcasts? Negative. Been quiet, mostly. You okay, driver? You sound shook up. I'm good. Just tired. Thanks for the copy. Ray drove straight through to Phoenix without stopping, afraid that if he pulled over, something might catch up to him. He made his delivery at 6 a.m. and immediately called his dispatcher to say he was taking a week off. He drove back to Dallas during daylight hours, refusing to drive that stretch of I-10 at night. He researched the area when he got home. Ranch Road 2083 existed, but there was no junction nearby, and certainly no town. The satellite imagery showed only empty land, no structures, no parking areas where all those vehicles could have been. Ray filed a report with the Texas Highway Patrol about the abandoned vehicles, but they had no record of any incidents at either mile marker 404 or 415 that night. Ray still drives, but he won't take night runs anymore, and he never drives that section of I-10 after dark. He's heard stories from other drivers, whispers about that stretch of highway, about broadcasts that tell you to exit, about vehicles found abandoned at remote ranch roads. Nobody knows what's at those exits, what those figures are. The drivers who exit don't come back to tell the story. Sometimes, late at night in his apartment, Ray's CB radio will turn on by itself. He doesn't own a CB radio anymore. He got rid of it after that night. But he still hears it, that female voice, speaking from nowhere. This is not a test. Exit now. Exit now. He's learned to ignore it. Or at least, he tries. Story 4. The Repeating Road. Thomas Blackwood drove a refrigerated truck for Pacific Northwest Logistics, primarily hauling produce and frozen goods between California's Central Valley and the Pacific Northwest. At 45, he'd been driving for 18 years and knew the West Coast routes like the back of his hand. He was meticulous about maintenance, fanatical about his sleep schedule, and had never had a serious accident. His friends called him Clock because you could set your watch by his arrival times. On November 12, 2018, Thomas loaded 30,000 pounds of frozen seafood in Eureka, California, bound for Portland, Oregon. The route was straightforward, Highway 101 north along the coast, then cut inland toward Eugene and up I-5. Total distance just over 400 miles, 8 to 9 hours with breaks. He left at 8 p.m., planning to arrive in Portland by 6 a.m. for the early morning delivery. The November night was clear, unusually so for coastal California in autumn. Stars filled the sky above the Pacific, and a quarter moon hung low over the water. Thomas had driven this route dozens of times, knew every curve, every scenic overlook, every small town he'd passed through. He'd timed his fuel stop for Crescent City, about halfway through the coastal leg, where he'd grab coffee and a sandwich at a 24-hour diner he frequented. The first hour was uneventful. Thomas passed through the small communities north of Eureka, his refrigeration unit humming steadily in the background, his GPS showing him making good time. He had an audiobook playing, a mystery novel he'd been working through for the past few trips. The ocean was a dark presence to his left, visible occasionally when the highway curved close to the cliffs. At 9:47 p.m., Thomas passed a distinctive landmark, a curved section of road with a scenic pullout, where a gnarled Monterey cypress tree leaned at a 45-degree angle, silhouetted against the sky. He'd passed this tree hundreds of times. Local legend said it was over 300 years old. Thomas barely glanced at it, his attention on the road ahead. 15 minutes later, at 10:02 p.m. by his dashboard clock, Thomas passed the tree again. Same location, same curve, same pullout. He frowned. That wasn't possible. He checked his GPS. It showed him miles north of that location, approaching Auric. But there was the tree, unmistakable in his headlights. Thomas shook his head. Probably just another twisted cypress. The coast was full of them. But something nagged at him. The pullout had been identical. Same configuration, same worn parking area, even the same graffiti on the interpretive sign about the tree. He increased his attention on the road, watching for distinctive markers. At 10:17 p.m., he passed the tree for the third time. Thomas pulled over, his heart rate elevated. This wasn't fatigue or hallucination. He'd passed the exact same spot 3 times in 30 minutes. That was physically impossible. He checked his fuel gauge. He'd used a quarter tank, the right amount for the distance he should have covered. His odometer showed the miles clicking by normally. But according to his GPS and his own eyes, He'd somehow looped back to the same section of Highway 101. He grabbed his phone. No signal, not unusual in this remote area. His CB radio produced only static. Thomas sat in his idling truck, thinking. Carbon monoxide poisoning could cause hallucinations, but his detector was green, showing normal levels. Stroke symptoms? He ran through a self-check. Speech normal, face symmetrical, arms working fine. No confusion beyond the impossible situation he was in. Thomas pulled back onto the highway, determined to pay close attention. He narrated his observations aloud, recording them on his phone. Passing mile marker 87. Curve to the right, guardrail on the left. Straight section, bridge over creek. I can hear the tires on the bridge surface. Another curve, tighter this time. And there's the pullout coming up, and the tree. At 10:31 p.m., he passed the cypress tree for the fourth time. "This isn't possible," Thomas said to his phone's voice recorder. "I've driven in a straight line north for 14 minutes. I haven't turned around. There are no intersections where I could have gotten confused. But I just passed the tree again. Same tree, same pullout, same everything." He decided to try something different. At the next opportunity, he pulled into the scenic pullout and parked beside the cypress tree. He got out of his truck, leaving it running, and walked to the tree. The night air was cold, carrying the salt smell of the ocean. Waves crashed against rocks somewhere below in the darkness. Thomas put his hand on the tree's rough bark, feeling the reality of it. The tree was real. The ground under his boots was real. This wasn't a dream. An interpretive sign stood near the tree. Thomas pulled out his flashlight and read it. Sentinel cypress. Estimated age 320 years. One of several landmark trees along the north coast. At the bottom of the sign, someone had spray-painted "Turn Back" in red letters. The paint looked fresh. Thomas felt a chill unrelated to the temperature. He climbed back into his truck and pulled out, accelerating north. He would not turn back. Whatever was happening, driving south would just take him farther from his destination. He needed to get to Portland. Logic insisted there had to be an explanation. Gas leak causing perceptual distortions, some weird fog effect creating illusions, something. At 10:56 p.m., he passed the cypress tree for the 6th time. Thomas pounded his steering wheel in frustration. He'd been driving for almost 3 hours and hadn't made any progress. His fuel gauge now showed half empty, but he was passing the same landmark over and over. The miles on his odometer kept accumulating. His GPS kept showing him progressing north, but reality, what he saw with his own eyes, told a different story. He tried turning around, heading south. Maybe that would break the loop. He found a wide spot, executed a careful 3-point turn, and drove south. He recognized landmarks passing in reverse, curves he'd just driven, pullouts, mile markers. He felt a surge of hope. This was working. He'd driven about 5 miles south when he saw it ahead. The cypress tree. From the other direction now, but unmistakable. He was approaching it from the north, which meant he'd somehow driven in a complete circle, without making any turns. Highway 101 was a straight north-south route here. There were no loops, no circles. This wasn't possible. Thomas stopped his truck in the middle of the highway. No other vehicles had passed in hours. He sat in the silence, broken only by the idling engine and the refrigeration unit. Think, he told himself. There had to be a rational explanation. His headlights illuminated the road ahead, a corridor of asphalt and guardrail and darkness. And standing in the middle of that road, about 50 yards ahead, was a figure. A person, standing perfectly still, silhouetted in his high beams. Thomas honked his horn. The figure didn't move. He honked again, longer. Nothing. He grabbed his spotlight and aimed it at the figure. It was a man, or shaped like a man, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, the kind from a century ago. And the man had no face. Where features should have been was just smooth, blank skin. Thomas threw his truck into reverse and floored it. The heavy vehicle surged backward, his trailer jackknifing slightly before he corrected. He didn't care. He needed away from that thing. He reversed for a quarter-mile before stopping, breathing hard. When he looked forward again, the road was empty. No figure. Nothing. His clock read 11:23 p.m. Thomas forced himself to calm down. He'd been on the road for 3.5 hours. His delivery was supposed to be in less than 7 hours. At this rate, he'd never make it. Never make it anywhere. He'd be stuck in this loop forever, driving past the same tree until his fuel ran out, or he went insane. Wait, his refrigeration unit. It had been running this whole time, and the seafood in his trailer needed to stay frozen. He had maybe 8 hours of fuel left for the truck, but the refrigeration unit drew significant power. If he kept driving in this loop, he'd run out of fuel, and when he did, he'd be stranded in this impossible stretch of highway, with faceless figures standing in the road. Thomas made a decision. At the next pass of the cypress tree, he pulled into the scenic pullout again. He got out and approached the tree, reading the graffiti one more time. Turn back. But he couldn't turn back. That didn't work either. So what did the message mean? He looked at the tree more carefully. The trunk was massive, probably 12 feet in diameter, twisted and gnarled. And there, on the ocean side of the tree, he noticed something. A gap. A space between two major roots, large enough for a person to squeeze through. Thomas crouched and shined his flashlight into the gap. Steps. Crude steps cut into the earth, leading down under the tree, into the ground. The stairs were old, wooden planks worn smooth by use, but they looked solid. Every instinct screamed at Thomas not to go down those stairs. But what choice did he have? Drive in circles until his fuel ran out. He thought of the faceless figure. How many drivers had been trapped in this loop? How many had given up, let their fuel run out, and ended up walking this highway forever? Thomas squeezed through the gap and started down the stairs. They descended steeply, quickly taking him below the level of the parking area, into the earth beneath the tree. The air smelled of soil and salt and something else, something organic and old. After 20 steps, the stairs leveled out into a tunnel, barely tall enough for Thomas to stand upright. His flashlight showed walls of packed earth, shored up with ancient timbers. The tunnel ran north, paralleling the highway above. Thomas walked, counting his steps. At 300 steps, the tunnel began to climb. More stairs leading upward. Thomas climbed them, his legs burning, until he emerged through another gap, this one beneath another twisted tree. He was in a different pullout, a different location. Thomas ran back to the highway and checked the mile marker. Number 126. He jumped forward almost 40 miles, past the entire loop section. The tunnel had somehow bypassed it, gone under it, through whatever impossible space had been trapping him. Thomas sprinted back to his truck, or tried to, before realizing his truck was miles back. He was on foot. He started walking north along the shoulder, thumb out, hoping for a ride. Within 10 minutes, headlights approached. A pickup truck pulled over. "You okay, buddy?" The driver was a local, a fisherman heading home from a late shift. "Truck breakdown?" "Yeah," Thomas lied. "Back at mile marker 87. Can you give me a lift to the nearest town?" The fisherman drove him to Crescent City. Thomas called his company, reported a breakdown, and had them send another driver for the refrigerated trailer. He took a bus back to Eureka, got his personal vehicle, and drove back up to retrieve his truck. The truck was exactly where he'd left it, at the scenic pullout by the cypress tree. Still running, still loaded, refrigeration unit still humming. But the fuel gauge showed completely empty. Impossible. It had shown half full when he'd left. The engine shouldn't still be running. Thomas had the truck towed to a garage. They couldn't find anything wrong with it. The fuel tank was full when they checked. The gauge had simply been wrong. Thomas didn't believe that for a second, but he didn't argue. He drives different routes now, refuses any runs on Highway 101 between Eureka and Crescent City. Other drivers have reported time distortions on that stretch, loops that shouldn't exist, hours that disappear. The company doesn't talk about it, but they've quietly stopped assigning night runs through that section. Thomas still has nightmares about the cypress tree, about driving past it over and over forever. And sometimes he wonders about those stairs under the tree, that tunnel through the impossible space. He wonders what would have happened if he hadn't found them, if he'd still be driving that loop, watching his fuel gauge drop, counting the passes of that ancient tree, waiting for his truck to finally sputter and die, and leave him stranded in a section of highway that doesn't follow the rules of normal reality. Story 5. The Empty Town. Deborah. Deb Martinez drove a package delivery truck for National Courier Systems, covering rural routes through New Mexico and West Texas. She'd been with the company for 12 years, working out of the Albuquerque Distribution Center. At 38, she was single, devoted to her 2 Labrador retrievers, and content with the solitude of long drives through the high desert. She prided herself on knowing every small town in her territory, every shortcut, every reliable restaurant in communities that barely qualified as towns. On April 22, 2017, Deb was assigned a special delivery route, a last-minute overnight run to drop packages at 3 medical clinics in remote areas. The route would take her east from Albuquerque into the empty spaces of eastern New Mexico, where towns were 50 miles apart and cell service was a hopeful fantasy. Her GPS showed the route clearly. Highway 40 east, then a series of state roads dropping south, hitting the 3 clinics, then back north to the interstate. She left at 9 p.m., her truck loaded with medical supplies and a few other packages. The April night was cool, temperature in the 50s, with a clear sky showing the Milky Way in all its glory once she got away from Albuquerque's lights. Deb loved these night runs. The solitude, the stars, the quiet roads. It was meditative. The first 2 deliveries went smoothly. She dropped packages at clinics in Newkirk and House, small communities that were barely awake even during the day. By 1 a.m., she was heading toward her 3rd stop, a clinic in a town called Esperanza, population 847, according to the last census. Deb had delivered there twice before, remembered it as a typical New Mexico small town. Adobe buildings, a single main street with a gas station and general store, a few churches. Her GPS guided her off Highway 268 onto a county road, then onto a smaller state route. The roads grew narrower, the pavement cracked and worn. This was right. She remembered this approach. After 20 minutes, she saw the lights of Esperanza ahead, a small glow on the horizon. But as Deb got closer, something felt wrong. The lights were too uniform, too bright. Street lights, all sodium vapor, giving off that characteristic orange glow. Every light was on, illuminating empty streets. She drove slowly into town, her headlights sweeping across buildings. Everything was wrong. The buildings were concrete, not adobe. Modernist architecture, probably from the 1960s or 70s, all flat roofs and straight lines. The streets were laid out in a perfect grid, every intersection at right angles, every block identical. This wasn't the Esperanza she remembered. That town had been organic, streets following the land, buildings of different ages and styles. Deb pulled over and checked her GPS. It showed her in Esperanza exactly where she should be. But this wasn't right. She grabbed her phone, no signal. She unfolded her paper map, the backup she always carried. According to the map, she was in the right location. Esperanza should be right here. She drove slowly down the main street. Every building was identical. 2 stories, flat roof, large windows on the ground floor, smaller windows above. Every building was dark inside, but the streetlights revealed interiors through the windows. Empty rooms. No furniture, no fixtures, just bare concrete floors and walls. The stores had no signs. The gas station had pumps but no branding, no logos. Even the street signs were blank, just green rectangles with no text. Deb's unease grew into fear. She needed to find the clinic, make her delivery, and get out. She drove up one street and down another, finding only more identical buildings, more empty rooms. No people, no cars except her own, no signs of life. The town was like a movie set, a facade with nothing behind it. She circled back to what should have been the main street and noticed something. One building had a light on inside, a warm yellow glow from a second-floor window. Deb stopped her truck and stared at that window. After minutes of emptiness, any sign of habitation drew her like a magnet. She climbed out of her truck, leaving it running. The night air was cold, colder than it should have been. Her breath misted. She approached the building with the lit window, found a door, tried the handle. Unlocked. The door swung open silently. Inside was a lobby of sorts, empty like the others, but at the back was a staircase. The light from upstairs spilled down. Deb climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing. At the top was a hallway with several doors. One door stood open, light coming from inside. Deb approached cautiously. "Hello? Anyone here? I'm looking for the medical clinic." No response. She reached the doorway and looked in. The room was furnished, a complete contrast to the rest of the town. Vintage furniture from the 1960s filled the space. A sofa, armchairs, a television set with rabbit ear antennae, a rotary phone on a side table. The TV was on, showing only static. The phone's handset hung off the hook, producing a dial tone that echoed in the silent room. On the coffee table sat a stack of newspapers. Deb picked up the top one. The Esperanza Daily Herald, dated April 22nd, 1967, exactly 50 years ago to the day. The headline read, "Final evacuation scheduled for tomorrow. Esperanza project to conclude." Deb scanned the article. It described something called the Esperanza Project, a sociological experiment where an entire artificial town had been built in the New Mexico desert. Volunteers had lived there for 2 years, their behavior monitored, studying how people adapted to planned communities. The project was ending, the volunteers being relocated, the town to be abandoned. Deb heard a sound from downstairs. Footsteps, multiple sets moving in unison. She went to the window and looked down at the street. People were emerging from the buildings. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all wearing clothes from the 1960s. Men in suits and thin ties, women in dresses and heels. They moved in perfect synchronization, walking to the center of the street, arranging themselves in neat rows. Then they looked up at Deb's window. All of them, simultaneously, turned their heads at the exact same angle and stared at her. Their faces were expressionless, blank. and they didn't blink. For 30 seconds, they stood frozen, staring. Deb backed away from the window, terror rising in her throat. She ran for the stairs, took them 2 at a time, burst out onto the street. The people were gone. The street was empty again, no sign anyone had been there. But her truck was surrounded by them. They stood in a circle around it, still in that perfect formation, still not blinking, all facing the truck. "Get away from my truck," Deb shouted. Her voice echoed in the empty town. None of them moved. She walked toward them, fear overridden by anger. "I said move." She was 20 feet away when they turned to face her, all at once, that same synchronized movement. Up close, she could see their faces more clearly. They weren't quite right. The features were slightly off, proportions wrong, like someone had described a human face, but never actually seen one. And their eyes didn't reflect her flashlight beam. The light just disappeared into those eyes like they were holes. Deb ran. Not toward her truck. She couldn't get to it through that circle. She ran down a side street, her boots pounding on pavement. Behind her, she heard footsteps, all in rhythm, following. She risked a glance back. They were walking, not running, but somehow keeping pace with her. That same measured walk, perfectly synchronized, closing the distance. She turned a corner, then another, trying to lose them. But at every turn, more of them appeared, emerging from buildings, forming their neat lines. They were herding her, cutting off escape routes. Deb found herself being pushed toward the center of town, toward what looked like a town square, with a fountain in the middle. The fountain was running, water splashing in the silent night. It was the only sound besides Deb's ragged breathing and the rhythmic footsteps of the people. She reached the fountain and stopped, spinning around. They'd formed a complete circle around the square, blocking every exit. One of them stepped forward from the circle. A man in a gray suit, his face as wrong as the others. He opened his mouth to speak, but the voice that came out was mechanical, synthesized. Visitor, unscheduled, unexpected. "Let me go," Deb said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just a delivery driver. I got lost. I'll leave and never come back." "Leave," the mechanical voice said. "Cannot leave. Project continues. Observation continues. Participation required." Participation in what? The article said the project ended in 1967. This town has been abandoned for 50 years. Ended? Yes. Concluded? No. Observation continues. Forever. Subjects required. More of them stepped forward, closing the circle. Deb looked around desperately for an escape route. There, a gap between 2 buildings, not blocked yet. She feinted left, then broke right, sprinting for the gap. The people moved to intercept, but she was faster. She squeezed through the gap, found herself in an alley, kept running. The alley opened onto a residential street at the edge of town. Deb could see darkness beyond the last row of houses. The desert, freedom. She ran toward it, her lungs burning. The footsteps followed, always the same distance behind. Never gaining, but never losing ground either. She reached the last house and burst into the desert. No path, no road, just scrub and rocks and darkness. She didn't care. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in the dirt a quarter-mile from town. She lay there gasping, listening. Silence. No footsteps. She turned to look back at Esperanza. The town glowed in its orange light, but the people weren't following. They stood at the edge of the town, a line of silhouettes, watching. Not crossing into the desert. Deb walked through the desert for 3 hours, using the stars to navigate north. Her truck was lost, her deliveries unfinished, but she was alive. She eventually reached Highway 268 and flagged down a passing motorist who drove her to the nearest real town. She reported her truck stolen, didn't mention the town. The truck was found 2 days later, parked on Highway 268, undamaged. Her GPS showed no record of the detour to Esperanza. Her delivery log had no entry for the third clinic. It was as if that entire trip had been erased. Deb looked for Esperanza later, using satellite imagery, maps, every resource she could find. There was nothing at those coordinates. No town, no buildings, no roads, just empty desert. But she found the article from 1967 in newspaper archives. The Esperanza project had been real, a 2-year sociological study. The participants had been relocated when the project ended. The town was supposed to have been demolished, but there were no records of demolition ever being completed. Deb quit her job and moved to Oregon, as far from New Mexico as she could manage. She doesn't drive anymore, doesn't like being alone in empty spaces. Sometimes she dreams of that town, those synchronized footsteps, those wrong faces, and she wonders if other drivers have found Esperanza, if the project is still recruiting participants, still observing, still continuing its eternal study of people who get lost in the dark. Story 6. The Tandem. Gary Wisniewski had driven tanker trucks for Petrochem Hauling for 19 years, moving fuel and chemicals across the Midwest. At 56, he was considering retirement, but needed a few more years to max out his pension. He was a careful driver, methodical and cautious. You had to be when hauling 8,000 gallons of gasoline. Gary lived alone in Detroit, never remarried after his divorce, and spent his off days fishing on Lake Erie. The road was his office, and he treated it with respect. On January 8, 2019, Gary picked up a full load of regular unleaded gasoline from a refinery in Toledo, Ohio, bound for a truck stop distribution center in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a routine run he'd done 100 times. The forecast called for light snow, but nothing serious. He left Toledo at 7 p.m., planning to arrive in Madison by 4 a.m., with a stop for required rest breaks. The route took him west on I-8090, the Ohio Turnpike, then up through northern Indiana into Illinois, before cutting north toward Wisconsin. The night was cold, temperature in the teens, with light snow beginning to fall around 9 p.m. as predicted. Traffic was moderate. Other trucks, some cars. Normal for a winter evening. Gary settled into his routine, maintaining steady speed, monitoring his gauges, listening to classic rock on the radio. Around 10:30 p.m., approaching the Indiana-Illinois border, Gary noticed headlights in his mirrors. Another tanker truck, similar to his own, had pulled up behind him. Same model Freightliner Cascadia, same Petrochem hauling livery, same configuration. Gary thought nothing of it. Petrochem ran many trucks on this route. He tried raising the driver on CB. "Petrochem tanker at my 6. You got your ears on?" No response. Gary shrugged and focused on the road. The snow was picking up slightly, accumulation beginning on the shoulder. He activated his wipers, adjusted his speed to 65 for the conditions. The tanker behind him matched his speed exactly. When Gary slowed for a curve, the other truck slowed in perfect synchronization. When he accelerated on a straightaway, the other truck accelerated identically. Gary watched it in his mirrors with growing unease. The truck stayed exactly 4 car lengths behind, never varying the distance. After 30 minutes of this, Gary decided to test something. Without using his turn signal, he changed lanes, moving from the right lane to the left. The tanker behind him changed lanes at exactly the same moment, maintaining its precise distance. Gary moved back to the right lane. The other truck did the same, simultaneous. Gary's hands tightened on the wheel. He grabbed his CB mic. "Petrochem driver behind me. What the hell are you doing? Stop tailing me." Static. He tried the company frequency. "Dispatch, this is driver 447, Wisniewski. I've got another Petrochem unit following me. Driver's not responding to radio. Can you check your board? See who else is running this route?" The dispatcher came back after a minute. 447. I show you as the only Petrochem unit on I-90 in Indiana right now. Next closest driver is 3 hours behind you. You seeing a ghost truck, Gary? I'm looking right at it. Same model, same livery, 4 lengths behind me. Can you get a unit number off it? Gary angled his mirror, trying to see the number painted on the truck's side. The numbers were there, but seemed to blur when he tried to focus on them, like they were moving or out of focus. Can't make it out. Numbers are weird. Might be an older unit, paint faded. Don't worry about it. Drive safe. Gary signed off, but didn't feel reassured. He checked his other mirrors. The highway behind the tanker was empty. No other vehicles in sight. Just the 2 Petrochem trucks moving through the snowy Illinois night, in perfect tandem. At 11:15 p.m., Gary reached his planned rest stop, a truck plaza at the Illinois-Wisconsin border. He put on his turn signal well in advance, preparing to exit. The tanker behind him activated its signal at the same instant. Gary took the exit ramp, watching his mirrors. The other truck followed, maintaining its exact distance. Gary pulled into a parking spot at the far end of the lot, away from other vehicles. He wanted a clear view of this other driver, wanted to confront whoever was playing games. He climbed down from his cab and turned to face the other truck. It had parked exactly parallel to his truck, offset by 4 parking spaces, mirror imaging his position. The engine was running, lights on, but Gary couldn't see anyone in the driver's seat. He walked toward it, his boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. As he got closer, he realized the truck wasn't just similar to his, it was identical. Same license plate, same minor damage on the left fender that Gary had gotten from a tight turn last month. Same custom mud flaps, same everything. Gary reached the driver's door and looked up into the cab. Someone sat in the driver's seat. Gary froze. The driver was him, not someone who looked like him. It was Gary Wisniewski, wearing the same clothes Gary was wearing right now, the same company jacket, the same Tigers baseball cap. The other Gary sat with his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead, not acknowledging Gary's presence. "What the hell?" Gary said aloud. He knocked on the door. The other Gary didn't respond. Gary tried the handle, locked. He knocked harder. "Hey, what's going on here?" The other Gary slowly turned his head and looked down at Gary. His face was expressionless, blank, and his eyes were wrong. Not different in any way Gary could identify, but wrong somehow, like looking into a mirror that reflected something slightly off from reality. The other Gary raised one hand and pointed back toward Gary's truck. Then he mouthed words, "Keep driving." Gary backed away from the truck. This was insane. Hallucination, carbon monoxide. But the truck was real. He could touch it, see his breath in the cold air, feel the snow under his boots. This wasn't a dream. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of the other truck, needing evidence. The camera clicked. The screen showed the images. But when Gary looked at them, the photos showed only empty parking space. The truck didn't appear in any of them. Gary ran back to his own truck and climbed in, locking the doors. He sat breathing hard, trying to think rationally. He called dispatch again. "I need you to send someone to the rest stop at mile marker 1, Illinois-Wisconsin border. Something's wrong. There's another truck here, and I need help. Gary, you okay? You sound panicked. Just send someone, please. All right. I'll call the state police. Have them check on you. Stay in your truck. Gary waited, watching the other truck in his mirror. It sat idling, the driver, his double, sitting motionless behind the wheel. 20 minutes passed. Gary saw flashing lights approaching, a state trooper pulling into the rest stop. Relief flooded through him. The trooper parked and walked toward Gary's truck. Gary climbed down to meet him. "Officer, thank you for coming. There's another truck over there. It's been following me. And the driver looks like—" "Calm down, sir. Where's the truck?" Gary turned to point. The parking spaces where the other tanker had been were empty. Gone. No tire tracks in the snow. No sign it had ever been there. It was right there. I swear it was right there. The trooper studied Gary with concern. "Sir, have you been drinking? Using any substances?" "No, I'm completely sober. There was a truck there, identical to mine. The driver looked like me." The trooper walked Gary through a field sobriety test, passed easily, and checked his truck for carbon monoxide leaks. Nothing. "Look, Mr. Wisniewski, you've been driving a long time tonight. Sometimes fatigue causes visual disturbances. I'd recommend you rest here for a few hours before continuing. I don't see any other vehicle, no tracks, nothing." Gary couldn't argue. The evidence had vanished. The trooper left, probably thinking Gary was having a breakdown. Gary sat in his truck, drinking coffee from his thermos, trying to process what had happened. The photos on his phone showed empty spaces. The trooper had seen nothing. Was he losing his mind? At 1 a.m., Gary decided he couldn't sit there forever. He had a delivery to make. He pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward Wisconsin. Within 5 minutes, headlights appeared in his mirrors. The tanker. Same position, 4 lengths back, matching his speed exactly. Gary tried to rationalize. It was him. Not a different driver, not another truck. It was somehow him, a version of himself following. But that made no sense. People didn't split into 2 versions. Trucks didn't duplicate themselves. Yet there it was in his mirror. Undeniable. He drove for 2 hours in that formation. The tandem pair of identical tankers moving through the Wisconsin night. The snow had stopped, leaving the roads wet but clear. Gary's mind raced through possibilities, rejecting each one. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't hallucinating. This was happening. At 3 a.m. approaching Madison, Gary saw an accident ahead. Flashing lights, emergency vehicles, traffic being diverted onto an alternate route. A semi-truck had jackknifed, blocking the highway. Gary slowed, joining the line of vehicles being redirected. The detour took him off the interstate onto a state highway. As he followed the route, Gary realized the tanker behind him was still there, still maintaining its exact position. The detour wound through rural Wisconsin, 2-lane roads through farmland. Gary's GPS showed an estimated 20-minute delay before he'd rejoin the interstate. 10 minutes into the detour, Gary saw something ahead that made his blood run cold. Another accident. A tanker truck, petrochem livery, had run off the road and into a ditch. Emergency vehicles surrounded it, firefighters hosing down the area. Gary slowed as he passed, looking at the wreckage. The tanker's cab was crushed. Gary could see inside. A body, covered by a tarp, still in the driver's seat. And on the ground near the truck, he saw something that made him stop breathing. A tiger's baseball cap. His cap. Gary pulled over, parking on the shoulder. He looked in his mirror. The tanker behind him had stopped as well. parked exactly where he'd parked, perfectly mirroring his position. Gary watched as the other Gary climbed down from that truck and walked toward the accident scene. Firefighters didn't seem to notice him. He walked right through their perimeter, approaching the crashed tanker. The other Gary stopped at the wreckage, looked at the covered body, then turned and stared directly at Gary. He raised his hand and waved, not a friendly wave, but a slow, deliberate gesture. Then he walked back to his truck, climbed in, and pulled back onto the road. Gary sat frozen, understanding slowly dawning. The accident had happened, or was happening, or would happen. Time felt twisted, non-linear. He looked at his dashboard clock, 3:17 a.m. He checked his logbook, found the entry he'd made when he started this run. The delivery time to Madison was supposed to be 4 a.m. But the accident, the detour, if he'd stayed on schedule, if he hadn't been delayed. Gary looked in his mirror. The other tanker was pulling away, continuing down the detour route. Gary had a choice. He could follow that truck, the ghost version of himself, and see where it led. Or he could turn around, go back to the interstate, take a different route entirely. Gary executed a careful U-turn and drove back toward the interstate. He took the next entrance ramp and headed toward Madison, using a completely different route, adding an hour to his trip. He didn't look in his mirrors. He didn't want to see if the tanker was still following. He made his delivery 3 hours late, cited the accident as the cause. His dispatcher was understanding. Gary finished his shift and drove home to Detroit, taking every major highway, avoiding detours, driving only during daylight. A week later, Gary was going through company emails when he saw an accident report. A petrochem tanker had crashed on January 8th at 3:17 a.m. on a Wisconsin state highway during a detour. The driver had been killed instantly. The driver's name, Gary Wisniewski. But that was impossible. Gary was alive, reading the report. He called the company's safety office. "That report's an error," the safety officer told him. "Someone mixed up files." "You're obviously fine, Gary. I'll get it corrected." But the report was never corrected. It stayed in the system, documenting an accident that both did and didn't happen. Gary requested early retirement, took the pension penalty, and quit driving. He won't talk about that night, won't explain why he left a job he'd planned to work for 3 more years. Sometimes Gary dreams of driving I-90 in the snow, watching his mirrors, seeing those headlights maintaining their perfect distance. And in the dreams, he always takes the detour. He always crashes at 3:17 a.m. And then he wakes up and doesn't know which version is real, the one where he died, or the one where he survived by following a ghost truck that showed him his own future. Story 7. The Signal. Patricia "Patty" O'Donnell drove a mobile communications truck for National Emergency Alert Systems, a government contractor that maintained the infrastructure for emergency broadcasts across the United States. Her job involved traveling to remote transmission towers, performing maintenance, updating software, and ensuring the nationwide alert system remained operational. At 42, she'd been doing this work for 15 years and had security clearance that let her access facilities most people didn't know existed. On September 14, 2020, Patty received an urgent dispatch to a transmission facility in rural Montana, about 90 miles northwest of Great Falls. One of the towers had gone offline, disrupting emergency alert coverage for a region of about 8,000 square miles. The facility was automated, no regular staff, just a fenced compound with transmission equipment. Patty's job was to get there, diagnose the problem, and restore service. The dispatch came at 3 p.m. She was expected to arrive by 11 p.m. Patty loaded her truck with tools and diagnostic equipment. The truck itself was a modified van with sophisticated electronics for testing signal strength and broadcast quality. She left Great Falls as the sun was setting, following increasingly remote roads into the Montana backcountry. The landscape was classic big sky country: rolling hills, scattered pines, endless open spaces under a sky so vast it seemed to curve at the edges. The GPS showed the facility location clearly, but the roads weren't well marked. Patty followed state highways that became county roads, that became gravel tracks. Cell service dropped away an hour into the drive. She was used to isolation. Many of the facilities she serviced were deliberately placed in remote areas to optimize coverage and minimize interference. At 10:45 p.m., Patty's GPS indicated she was within a mile of the facility. She drove slowly, watching for the access road. The night was moonless, her headlights the only illumination in an ocean of darkness. She found the turnoff, a narrow dirt road with a faded sign reading, "Nice Facility 47B, no trespassing." The road wound uphill for about 300 yards before opening onto a clearing. The facility sat in the middle, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A large transmission tower rose 200 feet into the air, its red warning lights dark. That was wrong. Those lights should always be operating, required by FAA regulations. Patty parked outside the fence and grabbed her equipment bag and laptop. The gate was locked with a coded padlock. Patty entered the facility access code she'd been given, and the lock clicked open. She entered the compound, her flashlight sweeping across the buildings. There were 3 structures: the main equipment, building, a small generator shed, and what looked like a storage unit. All the buildings were dark, no power. Patty approached the equipment building and used her keycard to access it. The door opened into a control room filled with racks of electronics: transmitters, receivers, routers, all the hardware that kept the emergency alert system functioning. Everything was dark. She checked the power panel. The main breaker had been thrown. Manually. Someone had shut down the facility. That was very wrong. These facilities were not supposed to be accessed except by authorized personnel, and any shutdown required documentation and approval. Patty pulled out her satellite phone. No signal. That was odd. Sat phones worked anywhere. She tried her radio. Dead static. Patty reset the main breaker. The equipment powered up with the hum of cooling fans and spinning hard drives. Status lights began blinking across the racks. She opened her laptop and connected to the facility network, running diagnostics. All systems showed green. No failures, no errors. The facility had been functioning perfectly before someone shut it down. Patty checked the facility log, a physical notebook where any visitor was supposed to sign in and document their work. The last entry was from 6 months ago, a routine maintenance visit. Nothing since. No record of who had shut down the power or why. She was about to report in when her equipment picked up a signal. Not a normal signal. Something broadcasting on the emergency alert frequency, but originating locally. Very locally. Somewhere in this compound. Patty checked her laptop. The signal was coming from the storage building. Patty grabbed her flashlight and walked to the storage unit. It was secured with a standard padlock, not the electronic locks used on the other buildings. She used bolt cutters from her truck to cut through it. Whatever was broadcasting illegally needed to be found and shut down immediately. The storage building was filled with old equipment, broken transmitters, coils of cable, standard surplus. But in the back corner, someone had set up a makeshift broadcast station. A laptop connected to a small transmitter, powered by a car battery. The laptop screen was active, running a program that was broadcasting a signal on a loop. Patty examined the setup. The laptop was playing an audio file, broadcasting it repeatedly on the emergency alert frequency. She grabbed her headphones and patched into the signal to hear what was broadcasting. Static first, then a voice, distorted and pitched down. "This is Emergency Alert Station 47B. Evacuation order in effect for Region 7. All residents must evacuate immediately. Proceed to designated shelters. This is not a test. Evacuation mandatory. You have 6 hours." Patty's blood went cold. This was an illegal broadcast mimicking an official emergency alert. She checked the laptop's settings. The broadcast had been running for 8 hours, since 2 p.m., and the signal strength was powerful enough to cover at least 50 miles. How many people had heard this? How many had evacuated their homes thinking there was a real emergency? She immediately shut down the illegal transmitter and started documenting everything with her camera. This was a federal crime, potentially terrorism. She needed to report this immediately. But her satellite phone still wasn't working, and her radio only produced static. She'd have to drive back toward Great Falls until she got cell service. Patty was packing up her equipment when she heard it. A vehicle approaching. She killed her flashlight and moved to the window. 3 SUVs pulled into the compound, parking in a line outside the fence. The headlights illuminated the area, and Patty saw people. No, not people. Things. They moved wrong, their joints bending at unnatural angles, their proportions slightly off. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more. They cut through the fence with tools, entering the compound in organized groups. Patty realized with sick certainty that they were coming for the transmitter, probably to restart the illegal broadcast. She couldn't be found here. She moved quietly toward the back of the storage building, looking for another exit. There was a small window. She forced it open and squeezed through, dropping to the ground outside. Her truck was visible from where the things had parked. She couldn't get to it without being seen. Patty crawled along the back of the fence, keeping the buildings between herself and the intruders, moving toward the tree line at the edge of the clearing. Behind her, she heard sounds from the storage building. Shouting, not in English, in some language that sounded harsh and guttural. They'd discovered the transmitter had been shut down. Beams from flashlights swept the compound. They were searching. Patty reached the fence at the back of the compound and climbed over, ignoring the barbed wire that tore at her clothes and skin. She dropped down on the other side and ran for the forest. Behind her, more shouting. They'd seen her. Lights converged on the back fence. She crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at her face. She could hear pursuit, multiple figures crashing through the forest behind her. Patty was in good shape, ran marathons, but the terrain was treacherous, roots, rocks, sudden drops. She stumbled and fell, got up, kept running. A voice called out, speaking English now. "Stop running. We need to talk. You don't understand what you've interrupted." The voice sounded almost human, but with the same distortion as the audio on the illegal broadcast. Patty didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned, until she couldn't hear pursuit anymore. She crouched behind a fallen tree, breathing hard, listening. Silence. Just wind in the pines and her own heartbeat. After 10 minutes, Patty carefully made her way back toward the compound, using a wide circle. Approaching from a different angle, she needed her truck, her tools, her phone, her keys. Everything was in that truck. She emerged from the tree line about 100 yards from the facility. The SUVs were still there, but the things were gone. No movement in the compound. Patty waited, watching. Nothing. She approached slowly, ready to run again. The facility was empty. The storage building door stood open, the illegal transmitter gone. They'd taken it. Patty reached her truck, untouched. She climbed in, started the engine, and floored it down the access road. She didn't breathe normally until she hit paved roads an hour later. At 3 a.m., she finally got cell service and called her supervisor. She reported everything: the illegal transmitter, the intruders, her escape. The supervisor listened with growing concern and told her to drive straight to the FBI field office in Great Falls. Federal agents met with Patty for 6 hours, taking her statement, examining her photos, deploying a team to the facility. The team found nothing. No illegal transmitter, no evidence of the SUVs, no tracks in the compound. The facility was operating normally. The storage building showed no signs of break-in or occupancy. The agents were polite, but skeptical. Patty's injuries from the barbed wire were real, but that only proved she'd climbed the fence, not why. Patty was put on administrative leave pending investigation. The inquiry concluded she'd experienced some kind of breakdown, possibly hallucinations caused by isolation and stress. Her security clearance was suspended. She resigned rather than fight it. But Patty knows what she saw. She monitored news from that region of Montana for weeks afterward. In the days following her visit to Facility 47B, over 300 families in the surrounding counties reported evacuating their homes after hearing an emergency broadcast. They'd packed up essentials, left their homes, driven toward Great Falls. Many had called 911, overwhelmed the system. But there had been no official emergency, no evacuation order. The government issued statements about a technical malfunction, a test signal accidentally broadcast. They apologized for the confusion. But Patty knew better. The broadcast had been deliberate, the evacuations intentional. But for what purpose? To clear the area, to test response times, to see how many people would follow instructions from an authoritative voice. Patty never found answers. She moved to Oregon and took a job in IT support, nothing to do with emergency systems or remote facilities. But late at night, she sometimes monitors the emergency alert frequencies, listening to the chatter between facilities, the test broadcasts, the routine traffic. And occasionally, very occasionally, she picks up something else. A signal that shouldn't be there. A voice giving instructions that aren't official. Broadcasts telling people to evacuate, to shelter in place, to follow procedures that don't exist in any emergency manual. She's tried, reporting these signals, but they disappear before authorities can verify them. Brief bursts, unauthorized transmissions, gone before they can be traced. Patty records them when she can, archives them on encrypted drives. Maybe someday she'll have enough evidence to prove what she knows. That the emergency alert system has been compromised. That something is using it for purposes the government doesn't control or even understand. That somewhere in the remote places where transmission towers reach into empty skies, other broadcasts are happening, other orders being given, and people are listening without knowing what they're really being told to do.